Okay. Welcome to Weekly Marx, January 18th. One of the questions that I wanted to ask is about ruthless criticism. And since on Weekly Marx, we're trying to look at original Marx stuff. The parallel question we might ask is about, can you be critical and cooperative at the same time? Is cooperation also about critique? In the sort of standard dialectic way, of course it is. What one might consider is that Marx says that the only cooperative species among the five great apes, chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, orangutans, and humans are the humans. This is John Romer, actually, speaking about Kantian cooperation. Seems a safer general strategy to rely on the underlying motive of self-interest, active in cooperation than on love for others, active in altruism. So there is something not purely altruistic about this, but rather something quite directed and concentrated, which makes it more critical in that sense. So I came across a new article, and rather than read it, because it is slightly technical from an ideological point of view, and it would take more of the time than I have today, an article by Bremer and Kansen, and both of whom are philosophers. And they pose an interesting set of questions. Their article is Ideology as Relativized a priori on the mind's relation to the social world. And this supports some of the issues relative to activism and relative to the idea that exchange and exchange value and all those things that we've been yakking about up till now, how much those are integrated. And we haven't even raised the question of ideology. This is their abstract. We propose an account of the subject's cognition and its relation to the world that allows for an articulation of the phenomenon of ideology. We argue that ideology is a form of what we call a priori activity if it transcendentally conditions the intelligibility of thought and practice. But we draw from the strands of post-Kantian philosophy of science and social philosophy in repudiating Kant's view that the a priori is necessary and fixed. Instead, we relativize the a priori. We argue that it is contingent and therefore revisable. More precisely, it is conditioned materially in that it is enmeshed with and shaped by material social practice. We conclude with some remarks about the possibility of agency over the relativized, materially conditioned a priori. That is, about the possibility of critique. And, you know, it may be a somewhat circular argument, but it's I think, useful and interesting in a time where we find that even the most mundane elements of current political practice have become bizarrely retconned. For example, the claim that and this is by the guy who wrote the lyrics, I guess, to the Village People song YMCA, that it is not about, it is not a gay song. So anyway, we digress. So some of the questions that may come is, given the a priori condition of critical labor or critical labor activity, a critical population of labor, can we gauge ruthless criticism? And therefore, can other Kantian things be addressed in this similar kind of way? If we have no business with the construction of the future or with organizing it for all time, there can be no doubt about the task confronting us at present, the ruthless criticism of the existing order. This is from a letter from Marx to Arnold Ruge in Dresden. It's 1843. His series of letters was published in the Deutsche Französische Jahrbuch of 1844. And it's the third in the series. The one I'm going to read now is the third in the series of letters Marx, at age 25, wrote to his friend Arnold Ruge during 1843. It's also the last in the 8-letter exchange. Marx and Ruge would include the entire series in the first and only edition of their joint venture. Marx is replying to Ruge's previous letter, in which Ruge proclaimed himself an atheist and a vigorous supporter of the quote-unquote new philosophers. I'm very pleased to find you so resolute and to see your thoughts turning away from the past and towards a new enterprise. In Paris, then, the ancient bastion of philosophy, absit omen, may this be no ill omen, and the modern capital of the modern world. Whatever is necessary adapts itself. Although I do not understand the obstacles, therefore I have no doubt that they can be overcome. Our enterprise may or may not come about, but in any event, I shall be in Paris by the end of the month, as the very air here turns one into a serf, and I could see no opening for free activity in Germany. In Germany, everything is suppressed by force, a veritable anarchy of the spirit. A reign of stupidity itself has come upon us, and Zurich obeys orders from Berlin. It's becoming clearer every day that independent thinking people must seek out a new center. I am convinced that our plan would satisfy a real need, and real needs must be satisfied in reality. I have no doubts once we begin in earnest. In fact, the internal obstacles seem almost greater than external difficulties. For even though the question where from presents no problems, the question where to is a rich source of confusion. Not only has universal anarchy broken out amongst the reformers, but also every individual must admit to himself that he has no precise idea about what ought to happen. However, this very defect turns to the advantage of the new movement, for it means that we do not anticipate the world with our dogmas, but instead attempt to discover the new world through the critique of the old. Hitherto, philosophers have left the keys to all riddles in their desks, and the stupid, uninitiated world had only to wait around for the roasted pigeons of absolute science to fly into its open mouth. Philosophy has now become secularized, and the most striking proof of this can be seen in the way that philosophical consciousness has joined battle, not only outwardly, but inwardly too. If we have no business with the construction of the future or with organizing it for all time, there can be no doubt about the task confronting us at present. The ruthless criticism of the existing order, ruthless in that it will shrink neither from its own discoveries nor from conflict with the powers that be. I am therefore not in favor of hoisting a dogmatic banner, quite the reverse. We must try to help the dogmatists to clarify their ideas. In particular, communism is a dogmatic abstraction, and by communism, I do not refer to some imagined possible communism, but to communism as it actually exists in the teachings of Cabet, Dezami, and Weitling. This communism is itself only a particular manifestation of the humanistic principle and is infected by its opposite, private property. The abolition of private property is therefore by no means identical with communism, and communism has seen other socialistic theories, such as those of Fourier and Proudhon, rising up in opposition to it, not fortuitously, but necessarily, because it is only a particular one-sided realization of the principle of socialism. And by the same token, the whole principle of socialism is concerned only with one side, namely the reality of the true existence of man. We have also to concern ourselves with the other side, i.e. with man's theoretical existence, and make his religion and science, etc., into the object of our criticism. Furthermore, we wish to influence our contemporaries above all. The problem is how best to achieve this. In this context, there are two incontestable facts. Both religion and politics are matters of the very first importance in contemporary Germany. Our task must be to latch onto these as they are and not to oppose them with any ready-made system such as the Voyage en Icarie. It's a recently released book by Etienne Cabet describing a communist utopia. Reason has always existed, but not always in a rational form. Hence, the critic can take his cue from every existing form of theoretical and practical consciousness. And from this ideal and final goal implicit in the actual forms of existing reality, he can deduce a true reality. Now, as far as real life is concerned, it is precisely the political state which contains the postulates of reason in all its modern forms, even where it has not been the conscious repository of socialist requirements. But it does not stop there. It consistently assumed that reason has been realized, and just as consistently it becomes embroiled at every point in a conflict between its ideal vocation and its actually existing premises. This internecine conflict within the political state enables us to infer the social truth. Just as religion is the table of contents of the theoretical struggles of mankind, so the political state enumerates its practical struggles. Thus, the particular form and nature of the political state contains all social struggles, needs, and truths within itself. It is therefore anything but beneath its dignity to make even the most specialized political problems, such as the distinction between the representative system and the estates system, into an object of its criticism. For this problem only expresses at the political level the distinction between the rule of man and the rule of private property. Hence, the critic not only must consider himself with these political questions, which the crude socialists find entirely beneath their dignity. By demonstrating the superiority of the representative system over the estates system, he will interest a great party in practice. By raising the representative system from its political form to a general one, and by demonstrating the true significance underlying it, he will force this party to transcend itself, for its victory is also its defeat. Nothing prevents us, therefore, from aligning our criticism with a criticism of politics, from taking sides in politics, from entering into real struggles and identifying ourselves with them. This does not mean that we shall confront the world with new doctrinaire principles and proclaim, "Here is the truth on your knees before it." It means that we shall develop for the world new principles from the existing principles of the world. We shall not say, "Abandon your struggles. They're mere folly. Let us provide you with true campaign slogans." Instead, we shall simply show the world why it is struggling, and consciousness of this is a thing it must acquire, whether it wishes or not. The reform of consciousness consists entirely in making the world aware of its own consciousness, and arousing it from its dream of itself and explaining its own actions to it. Like Feuerbach's critique of religion, our whole aim can only be to translate religious and political problems into their self-conscious human form. Our program must be the reform of consciousness, not through dogmas, but by analyzing mystical consciousness obscure to itself, whether it appear in religious or political form. It will then become plain that the world has long since dreamed of something of which it needs only to become conscious for it to possess it in reality. It will then become plain that our task is not to draw a sharp mental line between past and future, but to complete the thought of the past. Lastly, it will become plain that mankind will not begin any new work, but will consciously bring about the completion of its old work. We're therefore in a position to sum up the credo of our journal in a single word: the self-clarification, that is, critical philosophy, of the struggles and wishes of the age. This is a task for the world and for us. It can succeed only as the product of united efforts. What is needed above all is a confession, and nothing more than that. To obtain forgiveness for its sins, mankind's need only to declare them for what they are. That's an interesting little letter. And here's an article on ruthless criticism of all that exists by Bernard de Mello. On the 200th birth anniversary of Karl Marx, Bernard de Mello imagines a critical analysis of capital and capitalism as a social system, as a global system. The short piece draws on ideas from the works of Paul M. Sweezy, Paul A. Baran, and Paul M. Sweezy. Paul M. Sweezy, Mao Zedong, V.I. Lenin, Samir Amin, Bertil Ohlmann, Emmanuel Wallerstein, John Smith, Istvan Meszaros, John Bellamy Foster, Robert W. McChesney, R. Jamil Yana, and Paul Burkett. An earlier version appeared as a comment in the Mumbai-based Economic and Political Weekly in 2018. Ruthless criticism was one of Karl Marx's principal maxims. He practiced it with devastating effect in his critical analysis of capital and capitalism. For this, 200 years since his birth, he remains unsurpassed as one of the world's most influential intellectual figures. Indeed, he applied the ruthless criticism maxim to his own views too, constantly discerning what was genuine and what was false in what he had written. For example, having relied upon British colonialist source material at first in 1853, he thought of British colonialism as the quote-unquote unconscious tool of history in initiating what he hoped would be the economic transformation of India. Later, with the relevant empirical evidence at hand, in a letter to Nikolai Danielson in St. Petersburg from London on February 19th, 1881, he viewed what the British take from Indians without any equivalent as a bleeding process with a vengeance. Marx always remained wide open to empirical evidence. Moreover, his concepts and definitions were open-ended and adaptable to new and changing historical situations. Starting off as a romantic idealist, Marx critiqued G.W.F. Hegel's philosophical idealism, but discerned great merit in the dialectical kernel of his thought. He also acknowledged his intellectual debt to the materialist philosopher Ludwig Feuerbach, but critiqued his thought as passive, for it failed to grasp the significance of practical, critical, and revolutionary activity. Of course, Marx was particularly struck by the prevailing harsh material conditions of life of the working class, and this too shaped the development of his own version of materialist dialectics and historical materialism. From then on, there was no sharp break in his mode of thought. Indeed, one discerns an organic bond between the early Marx and the late Marx. The key influences were German philosophy, French socialism, British political economy, and much later, Russian populism. In Capital, Marx employed the abstract deductive method and what later came to be known as the procedure of successive approximations, wherein the analysis moves step by step from the more abstract to the more concrete, as simplifying assumptions are dropped at successive analytic stages. In each successive analytical stage, the theory thereby takes account of and is able to explain a wider range of actual phenomena. The method of abstraction helps isolate key aspects of the real world for an intensive investigation. For example, the nature of the capital-labor relation in Capital, Volume 1. On a lower level of abstraction, more aspects of the reality are taken into account, which may modify the tendencies discerned at a higher level of abstraction. Importantly, Marx's method was and is, in its essence, historical. The process of change, inherent in a specified set of social relations, is the product of human action. Society is both changing and within limits, under circumstances directly found, given, and transmitted from the past, can be changed. There is no capitalism that is not historical capitalism. And so at the core of his analysis of capitalism in Western Europe is how it came to being, how it has been working and where it is likely to lead. There's always an uneasy tension between historical forces promoting change and systemic forces bent on maintaining equilibrium. The struggle leads to a pulling apart of what is functionally united, and thereby brings about significant change. So even as Marx's critique of capital and capitalism of the 1860s remains the most radical, inevitably, the economy and society have changed very significantly since then. What is necessary is a continuation of the research work that Marx began, alongside a constant refining of his method. His theory was open-ended, and he would surely have expected us to critique it, especially from a Marxist point of view, in order to enrich it. With the passage of 150 years since Capital, Volume 1, Capital Volume 1 was first published, there is a significant additional empirical reality that calls for substantial modifications in the theoretical abstractions Marx undertook. Capitalism now functions on a truly global scale. The global capitalist system's periphery and semi-periphery is economically, politically, and militarily subordinate to its center. A much higher rate of exploitation in the periphery and semi-periphery, and an unequal sharing of the system's surplus, with the ruling classes and professional elites of the center getting the hindmost, forms the core of the system's exploitative institutional structure. With stagnation, that is, slow economic growth, high unemployment, underemployment, and excess capacity at the center, a worldwide proliferation of oligopolistic multinational corporations, and financialization of the capital accumulation process, a large, relatively independent financial superstructure towers over the real part of the world economy and most of its national units. This financial superstructure has in turn influenced the structure and functioning of the world's major real economies and the corporations therein, obliging their managements to also engage in financial speculation. With retained earnings not finding profitable outlets in real capital formation, they are diverted into speculative financial channels. Meanwhile, in the real global economy, with severe restrictions on labor to migrate from the periphery, semi-periphery to the center, multinational capital, mostly in highly unequal but complementary relations with business enterprises in the periphery, semi-periphery, and taking advantage of the higher rate of exploitation there, has captured much of the value generated by the workers in these enterprises. Such multinational, corporate, buyer-driven global commodity chains also extend down to peasants. Bereft of market power, the latter are super-exploited as price takers who are obliged to cede to capital not only the profits of their enterprise, the rent on the land they cultivate, and the interest on their accumulated debts, but also a part of their wages. Surely, a contemporary version of Capital, a critical analysis of capital and capitalism on a global scale, whether of volume 1, 2, or 3, will be quite different from the original. Given the space constraint, one can only list what this will entail. Class analysis at the world level, the value of labor power and its vastly different prices at the center, the periphery, and the semi-periphery, value theory as a theory of super-exploitation and unequal exchange, value theory as a theory of surplus value distribution in oligopolistic market structures, poor peasants and other petty commodity producers exploited by capital, unpaid domestic work that reproduces the commodity labor power, the global reserve army of labor, proletarianization as the degradation of the majority to a condition of utter powerlessness, natural resource grabbing and monopolistic rents, the unsustainable appropriation of youth values from nature, and the unsustainable dumping of the resulting waste of production and consumption onto nature, ecological imperialism, instability crises, and the problem of effective demand, financialization, the financial superstructure and its relation with it, with an impact on the real economy. Monopoly finance capital, an accumulation theory that takes account of both, adding to the stock of existing capital goods and to the stock of financial assets, and the interaction of these two aspects, the state as capital's political command structure, the sales effort, civilian government, militarism, and imperialism, the main contradictions and the principal contradiction, and social revolution. Oh, that's one heck of a wish list. 200 years after Marx's birth, the challenge is to reinterpret the world using his mode of thought and his method, historical materialism and materialist dialectics, and in the process critique the old interpretations which we have inherited. In particular, it is high time one disregarded the mechanistic view of Marxism as an economic determinism that supposedly yields a theory of history called historical materialism, which is claimed to be valid for the entire lifespan of the human species. The challenge of reinterpreting the world and changing it through a socialist social revolution has become urgent. For humanity may not have another 200 years if capitalism has its way. So, yes, that's a bit of a yammer and a sort of a list of things that really can and should be analyzed. I hope that we address some of that here, particularly because it seems like a daunting list, but we do what we can. We work on every little bit that we can, and given the kind of theoretical apparatus that we've sort of has been suggested, I think it is important. It's imperative for us to get it together and to bring ruthless criticism forward in that particular sense. To be aware of it in every current usage of the word. Can roasted pigeons fly or be thrown or launched? Can I own my own underwear? It sort of depends on sort of what Project One, steel underpants, number two, stuff, and then number three, profit. This is well, you don't know if you own your own underwear unless you put your name on it, I suppose. Anyway, without further ado, we will abbreviate what we're doing here and return to our regularly promised program. The next day's work will continue some of this, perhaps in a different vein. Let me stop share and cut the live stream.